So many of you have probably not seen one of these before. Until it was brought to me as a pile of parts, I had never heard of one of these either. Back in the 1970s, the Argentinian military said, "We want Uzi." And the Argentine government said, "We have Uzi at home." So I present to you the FMK-3, the Uzi we have in Argentina. This thing's looking kind of rough right now because I had to patch this section of pipe in here to complete the receiver. Eventually it's going to get some kind of coating on it. We don't know if we want to do something fun like a hydro dip pattern or a tactical color like FDE or frigging sparkly purple. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think we should do with it. This is a really fun project. It's pretty non-standard. You know, I mean, like I've drilled a lot of third holes in M16 low receivers, and this is unique. This is different. I like it. So originally, the Argentinian government started looking at submachine guns in the 1950s. In particular, they liked the M3 grease gun a lot, and they actually bought the production rights to it for a little bit. As time went on, the Uzi came on scene, and everybody started putting their magazine into the grip, which, as you know, makes things more compact and a little bit more efficient on design. With that said, I would describe this as anything but efficient. It is an 8 pounds unloaded 9mm tube gun, and it's like 1.5 feet long. Still more practical than the Mac-10 that I built. So with this being the FMK-3, I safely assume that there were 2 other prototypes before this, and the third one made it into production. So between the years of 1974 and 1991, the Argentinian government produced about 30,000 of these. And this thing had to have been super simple to produce. I mean, this is an extruded tube for the receiver. The bolt body is made from aluminum, which, I mean, you can get a lot of use out of your tooling on a lathe when you're working with aluminum. And then like the critical components of this, like the bolt face and the sear surface, are actually made from steel that are inserted into the bolt body. So how did my shop get their hands on one? Well, in order for this to come into the US, it has to be cut in 3 places with a cutting torch. That's what the ATF says. So I got this thing in pieces, but what's really nice about this is some of the more critical mechanical functions, which all exist in the low receiver here, were all intact. Because this isn't considered the gun, they didn't have to torch this up. So I had a completely intact low receiver to work with, and all I had to do was basically complete the tube. So if you're an SOT and you're looking for a cheap project to work on, first and foremost, these kits are like 250, 280 bucks. And you can go to a website called Online Metals where you can get the exact tube that you need to complete this for, I think it was like $45 to get the tube. Now, the time that you put into machining some of the features and fitting and everything, that's a different story. Something I thought was really hilarious about this is, so obviously this has like some Uzi influence to it, but also, if you look at the extrusion profile of this receiver tube here, that is actually an MP40 extrusion profile, and this is a modified Uzi magazine. So this is kind of a unholy matrimony of both German and Israeli technology, especially considering the Argentinian relationship with the Germans. To get this thing all welded back together, it's a little bit more involved than just welding pipe together. So you have to have good continuity for this bolt body to flow inside of. So there was selecting the perfect diameter and wall thickness of pipe. Then I had to 3D print jigs, or basically just cylinders, very, very specifically sized cylinders, that would bridge these tubes and keep them aligned while they got welded. So I had to print 3 different jigs. One of them had to have a notch for the charging handle to make sure that everything was indexed properly. Fortunately, we have a very talented TIG welder that we're able to contract, and he did fantastic work. Like, those are very clean boiler grade welds. While I was putting one of these back together, there was one feature I wasn't able to salvage, and that is the non-reciprocating charging handle with the dust cover. Due to the discontinuity between this stamped steel extruded tube and this solid machined pipe, there was just no way that I could retain the non-reciprocating feature. So as you shoot this thing, the charging handle does move, but that's not really a big deal because this is not a service weapon. This is just a rental toy for the most part. Another non-standard feature you might notice on here is the Picatinny rails and vertical foregrip. Because I have this reciprocating charging handle here, I didn't want people holding this and putting their thumb up on the receiver because I didn't want them to get hurt. I mean, that is a liability after all. And so I got on Prusa Slicer and I put together this grip assembly. Basically, I engineered safer playground equipment so that people are more inclined to grab this and not put their thumb up by the charging handle, which will be moving during operation. I've also threaded the barrel for 1/2x28, put this crazy looking muzzle brake on here. I drilled and tapped the receiver for a Picatinny rail so we can put an optic on there eventually. This thing is already like a very Monster Garage looking Mad Max type thing, especially with that muzzle brake. I'm half tempted to leave the thing bare just because it looks wild. The sights are pretty basic. You just have a hooded pin in the front, and then you have a rear sight that's similar to like an A2 rear sight. Also, you have two settings. You have 50 meters and 100 meters, which is actually kind of realistic for a 9mm. I appreciate their realistic approach to these iron sights, because I mean, in the first half of the 20th century, it seems like every submachine gun and sidearm and service rifle for that matter had iron sights out to a gazillion meters. Like the Browning High Power and the broom handle C96 Mauser both had like 1,000-meter adjustments on their elevation. But 50 and 100, that's actually reasonable for a 9mm. So this thing is select fire. You have safe, semi, and full auto. I think it's kind of interesting that for the semi position, there's an R, kind of like you would see on a Sten. I don't know if it actually means repeater. I don't know how to speak Argentinian. Maybe somebody in the comments can tell me what these actually stand for. But simply speaking, it's safe, semi, full, easy to remember. If you couldn't tell in the opening montage, this thing has an extremely slow rate of fire. But on top of that, with it being an 8-pound 9mm, it has like no recoil at all. So you have this giant bolt that travels probably 3 times the required distance to cycle. It's a very like chunky gun, like it just chunks like an M60. If you're an SOT looking to do a next build and you're kind of undecided, the FMK-3 is cheap, it's easy to put back together. If you're renting it out, it's very safe, so it's easy to handle, and on top of that, you have this bolt that runs coaxially to the barrel. So, you know, if you had some kind of catastrophic detonation, it's all going to be pretty well contained. Overall, this was a really fun project. As a matter of fact, the first person that rented this was this young kid from California. This is like the second time he's held a gun in his life. And, you know, we put the submachine gun in his hands, and he got the whole magazine on paper, so it works. In hindsight, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't try patching together these existing pieces. What I would do is I would take off the features like the trunnion, the front sight, the rear sight, the sling loop, and I would just start with a whole new pipe as opposed to piecing it together. So yeah, in hindsight, I would have just done one piece of pipe. So when I say this thing takes modified Uzi magazines, I thought at first I was just gonna have to mill that little notch in there, but there's a little more work to it than that. See, you have these tabs, these limiter tabs that keep you from over inserting on the Uzi, and they sit a little bit higher than they should for the FMK-3. So on the left, you have a modified Uzi magazine, and on the right, you have a Argentine FMK-3 magazine that was actually made this way from the factory. So you can see where that would be a problem. Was there any tactical application for this machine gun? As long as the MP5 exists, I would say no. I feel like this bolt moves so slow that by the time it goes into battery, somebody could draw their sidearm on me. Maybe if you're gonna use it for like suppressive fire because it has such a slow rate of fire, like it would take you forever to get through that magazine and you're still putting rounds down range on the bad guys. But beyond that, this thing is just fun. That's all it's really good for. So that's about all I've got to report on the Argentine FMK-3. And remember, if you think putting a stock on your AR pistol is edgy, just know that if you find a way to invent free energy, an oil corporation will find you. And when they do, they will send someone to your house in the middle of the night, and they will